Have you ever felt powerless when witnessing an injustice? Maybe you saw someone being treated cruelly or unfairly and thought, why is no one doing anything? Or perhaps you yourself have been the victim of an unjust situation and wondered, how can the world be so unbalanced? Injustices are everywhere, in the workplace, in schools, on the streets, and even online. All of us, at some point, encounter situations that challenge our sense of right and wrong. But the most important question isn't if we will face injustices, but how we will react to them. Did you know that great thinkers throughout history have reflected on this problem, and some offer solutions that can still help us today? Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest philosophers and theologians of all time, delved deeply into the concept of justice and how we can address the inequalities and problems we encounter. He believed that justice is not something we should expect only from governments or institutions, but that it begins within each of us, with our daily actions. Now think for a moment. What if the way you handle small injustices in your daily life could, in fact, help change the world around you? It might not be possible to solve all the world's problems, but imagine the impact of acting with justice and compassion in your everyday relationships. In this video, we're going to explore together how the wisdom of Thomas Aquinas, connected with biblical teachings, can guide us in times of turmoil and inequality. Get ready to discover that even when everything seems to be going wrong, there is a path of justice and peace you can follow. This will change the way you see the world, and perhaps even inspire you to be the change you're looking for. The injustices we face in the modern world are varied and complex. They can be seen in different areas of our lives. In the workplace, where people are underestimated or exploited, in society with economic inequalities that seem to grow every year, and even in our interpersonal relationships, where we are sometimes treated in ways that feel unfair or unbalanced. These experiences can create a deep sense of powerlessness. We live in a world where the ideal of justice often seems unattainable. So how can we deal with these situations without losing hope? How can we find peace in the midst of the turmoil of a world that seems more unequal every day? Thomas Aquinas, who lived more than 700 years ago, not only thought deeply about the concept of justice, but also left a legacy of practical teachings that can be applied in any era. For him, justice was not a distant concept, something to be dealt with only by governmental institutions or courts. On the contrary, he saw justice as an essential virtue that we must all cultivate in our personal lives. And surprisingly, his reflections remain extremely relevant to the challenges we face today. When studying Aquinas' teachings, we see that he understood justice in a broad and deep way. For him, justice is not simply the act of following laws or moral rules, but rather a daily practice, a constant effort to give others what they are due. In other words, justice is not passive. It is active. It involves making daily decisions that benefit others, even when this is not easy or convenient. So how do we apply this in the modern world? We live in an era where social media and digital communication allow us to see injustices occurring in real time around the world. News of corruption, exploitation, and violence spreads instantly, and the cycle of outrage and despair can seem never-ending. But the truth is, our ability to act in the name of justice begins within ourselves, in our closest relationships and communities. Aquinas teaches us that justice is closely connected to the concept of charity. In other words, being just doesn't mean ensuring everyone gets what they deserve in a cold, objective way, but rather acting with compassion and love, always seeking the good of others. Justice without charity can become severe and inhumane, while charity without justice can become indulgent and condescending. Those who practice true justice know it requires balance, discernment, and often personal sacrifice. Today, we are surrounded by opportunities to practice justice. Even if we don't have the power to change entire systems, we can make a difference in our daily interactions. Think, for example, of the small injustices you may have witnessed recently. A colleague being treated unfairly, someone being judged hastily because of their appearance or background, or even you being underestimated or disrespected. The most common reaction in these cases might be anger or even the urge to retaliate. However, the teachings of Thomas Aquinas and the scriptures invite us to respond differently. In Isaiah 1:17, we read, "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow." This verse reminds us that justice, in addition to being a personal virtue, is also a collective mission. We are called to fight against injustices, not just for our own benefit, but on behalf of those who have no voice or power. But that doesn't mean we should act impulsively or recklessly. Justice, as Aquinas explains, requires discernment. It's not about attacking those who have wronged us, but rather finding ways to correct the error with love and wisdom. This is crucial. For our actions to be truly just, they must be guided by a sincere desire to restore order and goodness, not by anger or revenge. This leads us to an important reflection on the role of justice in the world today. In a time when communication is fast and reactions are often immediate, we are frequently tempted to judge and condemn before understanding. The practice of justice, as taught by Aquinas, reminds us of the importance of considering context, listening before judging, and seeking solutions that bring harmony rather than further conflict. For example, when seeing an injustice in the workplace, we can act justly by raising the issue constructively, aiming for the well-being of all involved. In our personal relationships, we can be just by treating people with the respect and dignity they deserve, even when we feel we haven't been treated the same way. By doing this, we are practicing justice in its deepest sense, a justice that transforms, that elevates others, and that contributes to the building of a more balanced world. In summary, the concept of justice, as described by Thomas Aquinas, is profoundly relevant to the challenges of the contemporary world. It's not just about acting correctly in legal or formal situations, but about cultivating a daily attitude of seeking equity and the common good. In a world where injustices can feel overwhelming, we are called to be agents of change, beginning with small actions that reflect God's love and compassion. In the next part of this video, we will explore how you can apply these teachings practically in your daily life, dealing with injustices more effectively and meaningfully. We will look at concrete examples and reflect on how balancing justice and charity can transform not only the world around you, but also your own heart. After all, when we seek justice with love, we are able to overcome even the greatest adversities with hope and determination. The concept of justice, as understood by Thomas Aquinas, is multifaceted and profound, going beyond laws and social norms that we typically associate with the word. For him, justice is, in essence, a virtue, meaning it is part of ideal human behavior, something to be cultivated and practiced constantly. At the same time, justice is a response to the needs and dignity of others, and this response must be guided by a principle of equity, which considers what is due to each person. Aquinas believed that justice is an essential part of moral and spiritual life because it is closely tied to respect for human dignity and the natural order that God established in the world. This brings us to an important consideration. True justice is not only about following rules, but about understanding what is necessary to promote the common good. Therefore, when we face injustices in the world, whether on a large scale or in everyday interactions, we are called to act justly, not only to correct the error, but to promote a greater good. Justice as a virtue. In his work Summa Theologica, Aquinas describes justice as the constant and perpetual will to give each one their due. This concept, simple at first glance, carries enormous weight when we try to apply it in our daily lives. What does it really mean to give each one their due? For Aquinas, this is a matter of recognizing the dignity of each human being and treating others accordingly. In our modern world, this can seem like an enormous challenge. We live in a society where individualism and selfishness often take precedence in our daily decisions. We are encouraged to seek our own good, often at the expense of others. However, justice calls us to a different path, a path where the well-being of others is as important as our own. This may seem like an impossible task, especially when we encounter systemic injustices such as economic inequality, racial discrimination, or corruption. But Aquinas reminds us that justice should not be seen as something that applies only on a large scale. It begins in our personal interactions. The way we treat others, our friends, family, co-workers, can have a significant impact on the justice we see in the world around us. If everyone practiced justice in their personal lives, the cumulative effect would be powerful. However, practicing justice on a personal level requires discernment and self-control. Often, our emotions lead us to impulsive responses when we perceive an injustice. We want to retaliate, react with anger, or withdraw completely from the situation. But true justice, as described by Aquinas, requires us to maintain a balanced perspective. This means not only correcting an error, but doing so in a way that respects the dignity of all parties involved. Justice and charity. The union that transforms. One of the most important points Aquinas teaches us is that justice alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by charity. Justice without charity can become severe and ruthless. It can lead to rigidity, where people are treated as mere cases or numbers, not as human beings with dignity and value. On the other hand, charity without justice can become indulgent, allowing injustices to continue because we are more concerned with avoiding conflict than with correcting what is wrong. Aquinas teaches us that justice and charity go hand in hand. Charity helps us see others with compassion, while justice guides us to act in ways that correct wrongs and restore order. In other words, charity reminds us that in our pursuit of justice, we must always consider the well-being of others. We cannot seek justice in a way that causes more harm or pain. True justice, for Aquinas, is that which promotes the common good and leads to peace and social harmony. To better understand this union between justice and charity, think of a common situation where you witnessed an injustice. Perhaps it was at work, where a colleague was treated disrespectfully by a superior. Your initial reaction might have been anger or frustration. However, the just and charitable response would be to address the situation in a way that corrects the wrong without escalating the conflict. This could mean talking to the colleague to offer support and, if appropriate, bringing the issue to higher management, but always with the aim of restoring peace and respect. In Isaiah 1:17, we are called to learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. This verse reminds us that justice must be active. It is not enough to recognize an injustice and feel outraged by it. We must actively seek ways to correct the wrong and promote the good. But how do we do this in practice, especially in such a complex world? This is where many people feel overwhelmed. The injustices seem so large, and our individual actions seem so small. However, Aquinas and the Bible offer us a clear path. Start where you are. The practice of justice begins in our daily interactions, in how we treat those around us. If we act with justice and charity in our closest relationships, that impact will begin to spread. Justice in the contemporary world. Today's world presents unique challenges when it comes to justice. Social media exposes us daily to a flood of information about injustices happening around the globe, from humanitarian crises to cases of discrimination in our own neighborhoods. This can leave us feeling paralyzed or demotivated, believing that no matter how much we try, we cannot truly make a difference. But as Aquinas teaches us, justice should not be something we expect only from governments or large institutions. It begins in our own actions. This means that even in the face of global injustices, we have the power to make a difference in the small things. Think, for example, about the way you treat the people you interact with every day. Are there ways you can practice justice in your words, your attitudes, and even in your consumer choices? Another important point is to remember that for justice to be effective, it must be balanced with charity. Stay with me until the end of this video to understand how this balance between justice and charity can transform not only your behavior, but also the impact you have on the world around you. True justice is not just about correcting what is wrong, but about creating a more just and humane world for all. This brings us to an important reflection. When practiced with charity, justice can transform the world. This doesn't mean that injustices will immediately disappear, but rather that by practicing justice in our own lives, we begin to influence the environment around us. And when more and more people begin to do the same, the collective impact can be transformative. Justice and forgiveness. Another important aspect of justice, according to Aquinas, is the role of forgiveness. Often, when we face a personal injustice, our first reaction is anger or resentment. We want to see the person who caused us pain suffer the consequences of their actions. However, Aquinas reminds us that forgiveness is an essential part of justice. This doesn't mean we should ignore injustices or refrain from correcting them, but rather that we should approach correction with a spirit of reconciliation rather than revenge. Forgiveness, as the Bible teaches us in Matthew 6:14-15, is fundamental to our own inner peace. When we forgive, we are not denying the injustice that occurred, but we are freeing ourselves from the weight of hatred and resentment. And by doing so, we make room for justice that heals, rather than simply punishes. This is especially important in our personal relationships, where injustices can be more emotional and deep-rooted. Aquinas reminds us that justice without forgiveness can lead to a hardening of the heart. This means that if we do not cultivate the ability to forgive, we can become bitter and trapped in the desire for revenge, preventing us from acting in a truly just way. Justice and hope. In times of great injustice, it can be easy to lose hope. We believe that the system is too big, the injustices are too deep, and our actions are too small to really make a difference. However, Aquinas reminds us that justice is closely linked to hope. Hope, according to him, is the virtue that allows us to keep seeking the good even when it seems difficult or impossible. Hope is what keeps us moving forward, even when the road seems long. It reminds us that our just actions, no matter how small, have value. And more importantly, hope connects us to the faith that God is in control and that divine justice will be done in His time. When we face injustices that seem insurmountable, hope gives us the strength to keep fighting, knowing that our actions are not in vain. By uniting justice, charity, and hope, we can face the injustices of the world with a perspective that goes beyond the immediate. We can see our actions as part of a larger plan, and this gives us the courage to continue seeking the good, even in the face of adversity. Justice in practical life. So how can we apply these teachings of Thomas Aquinas in our practical lives? Here are some concrete ways to practice justice in your daily life. 1. Treat others with dignity and respect. This may seem obvious, but we often neglect small daily interactions. How you treat your coworkers, your family, and even strangers can have a profound impact. 2. Speak out against injustices you witness. When you see someone being treated unjustly, have the courage to speak up. This may be uncomfortable, but justice requires that we stand up for what is right. 3. Practice forgiveness. When someone hurts you, try to forgive. This doesn't mean forgetting what happened, but rather freeing yourself from the need for revenge and allowing justice to be done peacefully. 4. Seek the common good. When making decisions, ask yourself, how will this affect others? By considering the impact of your actions on the collective well-being, you are practicing justice in a broader sense. 5. Cultivate hope. Even when the road seems difficult, hold on to the hope that your just actions are contributing to a better world. By practicing justice daily, starting with small actions in our own lives, we can begin to see significant changes around us. This may not happen overnight, but the consistent practice of justice, guided by charity and hope, has the power to transform our world in profound and lasting ways. In the climax of this video, we will dive into the crucial point that ties everything we've discussed together: how balancing justice and charity can create powerful and lasting changes in our lives and in the lives of those around us. The most important moment in our reflection on justice and how it can be applied in today's world is understanding how we can balance justice with charity. This is the key that transforms our worldview, and more importantly, our daily actions. In the previous section, we discussed that justice, when applied without charity, can be severe and even inhumane. On the other hand, charity without justice can become indulgent, allowing injustices to continue without being corrected. So how do we find this balance? What Thomas Aquinas teaches us is that this balance is not something abstract, but very practical. It begins in our hearts, in our intentions, and manifests in our daily actions. When we encounter a situation of injustice, we must first ask ourselves, how can I act justly here while respecting the dignity of everyone involved? This can be a difficult task, especially when we are emotionally involved or when the injustice seems too big to be resolved by our individual actions. However, it is precisely here that true transformation begins. By recognizing that our small just actions, when done with love and compassion, have a much greater impact than we imagine, we begin to see the world in a different way. Justice, then, is not just a response to wrongdoing, but a construction of something new, something that promotes the common good and elevates the lives of everyone around us. Let's think of a practical example. Suppose you witness a colleague being unfairly criticized by a superior. Your initial reaction might be anger, and you may even want to retaliate or take aggressive action in defense of your colleague. But true justice, according to Thomas Aquinas, would be to seek a solution that restores balance and harmony while respecting the dignity of all parties. This might mean talking to your colleague to offer emotional support, finding a constructive way to resolve the situation with the superior, or, if necessary, taking the issue to company management in a peaceful and thoughtful manner. This kind of action not only corrects the error, but also promotes an environment of mutual respect and well-being. And as more people practice this kind of justice in their personal and professional environments, the impact begins to spread. Small changes in our daily behavior can lead to significant transformations in the culture and relationships around us. The most surprising point here is that by balancing justice with charity, we ourselves are transformed. Instead of being dominated by anger, resentment, or a desire for revenge, we find inner peace and a greater sense of purpose. We become, as Aquinas suggests, agents of true justice, the kind that heals, that reconciles, and that builds a more just world for everyone. If you've made it this far, you're about to discover how this balance between justice and charity can change not only your attitudes, but also the way you handle life's daily challenges. Those who can put this wisdom into practice not only find inner peace, but also become catalysts for positive change around them. Now, it's important to remember that this balance is an ongoing process. It doesn't happen overnight. There will be times when it will be difficult to be both just and charitable, especially when injustices seem enormous and overwhelming. But by continuing to practice, by continuing to seek justice with a heart full of charity, you will be getting closer and closer to the ideal that Thomas Aquinas proposed. We have reached the point where we can understand that justice and charity, when united, not only correct the wrongs of the world, but also help us create a society where the common good is more important than individual interests. This is the true reward of balancing these two virtues. We not only transform the world, but also transform ourselves from within, drawing closer to what God has planned for each of us. Now that you understand the depth and power of these virtues, get ready for the conclusion of this video, where we will summarize the key points and offer a final reflection that may change the way you see the world and your own actions. We have come to the end of this reflection, and now it's time to tie together all the ideas we've discussed about justice, charity, and the role each of us plays in a world that often seems saturated with injustices. Throughout the video, we explored the teachings of Thomas Aquinas, who showed us that justice is not just a theoretical virtue, but a daily practice, deeply rooted in our ability to see and treat others with dignity and respect. What we have learned is that true justice does not only happen in courts or political arenas. It begins in our small interactions, in our daily choices, and in how we deal with others. Justice, according to Thomas Aquinas, is the virtue that leads us to give each one what they are due, but it only reaches its full potential when practiced in conjunction with charity. It is charity that reminds us not to treat justice as something cold or harsh, but as an opportunity to build relationships and more just and compassionate societies. When we face injustices, whether in our personal lives or in larger global issues, the temptation to respond with anger or indifference is great. However, the teachings we have explored show us a different path. The path of balance between justice and charity, where our actions are guided not by a desire for revenge or fear of conflict, but by a genuine desire to promote the common good. By putting this balance into practice, we not only contribute to a more just world, but also experience an inner transformation. Our reactions to adversity change, and with that, our ability to deal with life's challenges in a more serene and constructive way increases. Justice, then, becomes not only a way to correct wrongs, but also a tool for peace and reconciliation, both for others and for ourselves. So, if you want to practice justice as Thomas Aquinas proposes, remember that it begins with the small things, in how you treat those around you, in how you handle difficult situations, and even in how you react when witnessing an injustice. It is through these small actions that we create a larger impact, which extends beyond us, positively influencing our communities and the world as a whole. As a final thought, reflect on this idea. Justice, when united with charity, has the power to transform the world in ways we often cannot see immediately. It is a process that requires patience, consistency, and faith. But by following this path, you will not only be correcting wrongs, but also planting the seeds for a world where human dignity is always respected, and where the common good is placed above individual interests. Remember the words of Proverbs 21 verse 15. When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. In seeking justice, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us, we find joy, peace, and a greater purpose. This is the true power of justice and charity. Together, they not only elevate us as individuals, but also create the foundation for a more just, compassionate, and humane society. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this reflection has brought new perspectives and inspiration to your life. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more discussions like this. And remember, justice begins with us.